Recording now, and I'm going to share my screen with you. So it'll just take one moment here to get things ready. And then if I could get verbal confirmation just from one student, well, anyone, before I do that, let me unmute those mics real quick. That way you guys can actually unmute it. Okay, you guys can see my screen, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, awesome, awesome.
Yes.
So this PowerPoint's going to be about systematically approaching the researching process. Now, if you were in my last, if you were in 1301, the prerequisite English course, some of you may have placed at a higher level and just jumped into this class. But if you were in 1301, there should be some things that you're expected to know coming into this class. One of those things is going to be the writing process itself. And secondly, APA formatting. So it's expected that you already have some level of confidence and competency in both of those areas. Now, if you feel like you need a refresher on that information, that's totally fine. Just be mindful that that's not going to be the focus in this lecture. This lecture is going to take things a little bit further than what I would normally cover in a 1301 course. But you know what I'll do? So in the tools for your toolbox, the tools for success link that's inside the classroom, I'm actually going to post two of my lectures from 1301 inside that link. That way, if you do need a refresher on APA formatting or a refresher on the basics of the 5 stages of the writing process, you can go there and catch up. But for the purposes of this presentation, we're going to be solely focusing on stages 1, 2, and 3 of the writing process. And I'll explain more of that in just a moment. So as far as APA formatting goes, again, this should be an expectation coming into this class that you already know how to do all of this correctly. So a cover page should be exactly as it's laid out in an APA template. Obviously, you need in-text citations and reference entries for every outside source that you integrate in your papers. And then, of course, you have to have a reference page. That's where your reference entries would go. And I have a bunch of tips and tricks as far as that goes. But again, this video is not about APA formatting. If you need a refresher on it, go back and go to that Tools for Success link in the classroom. Now, what are the 5 stages of the writing process? We've got stages 1 through 5. We are predominantly going to focus on stages 1, 2, and 3 in this particular video. So stage 1 is preliminary thinking. This is essentially the brainstorming phase when you start gathering all the material you need as far as what you want to do, what you want to write about. Everything is just in your head at this point, right? There's no practical plan, there's no thesis statement, nothing like that. Stage 2 is the researching phase, which we're going to talk a lot about in this PowerPoint. Stage 3 is the thesis statement and the outlining, which is arguably the most important part of your entire essay. And then stages 4 and 5, this is what students typically think of when they get a writing assignment. If your writing process looks something like you get the assignment, you wait 4 or 5 days, and you realize, oh, the deadline's coming up tomorrow. I better get this done. And then you sit down and knock it out in an hour or two, and you do all your research as you go. And then you just cross your fingers and pray that you get a decent grade. Yeah, that's not a recipe for success. That's not the right way to systematically approach the writing process. Because what we want to do is have a repeatable formula for success. And if we follow these stages and work through them intelligently, we're going to produce high quality papers every single time. And it's going to take a lot of stress off you too, because if you follow stages one, two, and three the way you're supposed to, and the way I'm going to talk about in this presentation, it's going to make writing the paper super easy. Now, as far as this entire class goes, we've already started working in Unit 1, the preliminary thinking, because we're already starting to generate ideas for our topic. And looking ahead, Unit 3, this is going to be the start of our research phase. And if you did happen to glance ahead, that's totally fine. But essentially, what we're doing in Unit 3 is building an annotated bibliography. And I'm going to talk a lot about that later on. And then Stage 3, this is pretty much in line with what we're asking in the Unit 4 assignment. So in Unit 4, you start building an introduction. You have a thesis statement that's more or less set in stone. And then the rest of the task is to create an outline, which is essentially a scaled down version of what your essay is actually going to be. You could think of it as just the bare bones skeleton of your essay and all the research that you plan on integrating. And then when you get to Unit 7, which is going to be later in the course, that's when we actually do the drafting phase here. But notice we're not going beyond this yet. So pretty much the first month of this course, we're not actually writing the essay yet. We're going to slowly build up to it. So really this course revolves around the writing process and extending it out in the way it's supposed to be done, which is normally across several weeks, because I like to think of the writing process as building a house. You don't want to just jump into stage 4 and start pouring a concrete foundation, grabbing the nearest bucket of nails, and start nailing boards together, because it's going to be an absolute disaster. And that's the issue that a lot of students run into when they have English courses and they're faced with writing assignments in their higher level courses. Don't get too far ahead of yourself. Just trust the process and work through it as a project. So if you were with me in last term with 1301, I like to really break it down and say, look, stage 1, think of this as you are looking to build a house somewhere. And at this point, you're just looking, what's a good location? Do I want a 1-story or 2-story? What's my budget look like? What's the school district like? Do you want to live in the country? Do you want to live in a suburb? Everything's just an idea right now. And then stage 2 comes along, and that's when you actually start doing research on it. And you say, all right, what are the building codes? What are the taxes like? Let me get in contact with contractors that can give me quotes for this. And then you start piecing together a puzzle of whether or not you can actually follow through with this. And maybe your plans change, maybe your ideas change. And then once you come to a point where you're like, all right, I've researched enough. I know everything that I'm going to do. I've got all these contractors lined up, and they're going to help me make this house. So stage 3 comes along, and your thesis statement and outline, that's like the blueprint for your house. So more or less, it's set in stone. You don't want to deviate from it. At this point, you've got timelines on exactly how long each stage is going to take. You know what to expect. That way, when you get to stage 4, there's no surprises, right? You pour the concrete foundation, you start framing the house, and everything starts building one step after another, just like you planned. And if you did your research correctly back here, you shouldn't have any surprises. And of course, you want to proofread and edit as you go, because you don't want to measure once and cut 14 or 15 times. You want things to run smoothly. So you write a sentence, you revise it. You write a paragraph, you revise it. Just like most things in life, the things that are best planned are going to be the most successful. Now, recapping audience analysis, because this is also very important. Everything you write should have an audience in mind. Now you might think, well, this is college. I'm just writing this paper for a grade. And partially that is true. But it's very useful to think of the grading rubric and the instructions for the assignment as your audience. And the reason why I say that is because every assignment you get at CSU is going to have some sort of rubric attached to it. And instructors are taught to follow these rubrics and understand the criteria and look for that criteria in the assignments that we are reviewing and evaluating. So, as long as you meet the expectations that are outlined in the grading rubric and you always strive for that exceeding expectations category, then you're setting yourself up for success. You're meeting the audience's needs. Now, I like to carry on with this house analogy because, imagine you're not building this house for you anymore, but you're building it for a client, and that client has specific needs and wants. For example, let's imagine we have an elderly couple and the man has a pacemaker and he needs a handicap accessible home and he wants to live within a half hour of the nearest hospital. So all of a sudden, stages 1 and 2 take a drastic turn. Everything changes now because we're not thinking about us anymore. We're thinking about other people and we're trying to meet their needs during this project. So if we just jump straight to stage 4 and we totally disregard stages 1, 2, and 3, we disregard who our audience is, we're going to miss the mark a lot. Most of the time, we're going to miss the mark, and that's what I want you to prevent yourself from stumbling upon, because it's very easy to just wait until the last day before an assignment, just skim over the instructions, jump straight to stage 4, get it done and over with. But remember, we're building something that you want to take some pride in. You want to have a high quality piece at the end of the day. And all of this is going to carry over into the workplace when your supervisor, your fire chief, or your deputy, or whoever asks you to sit down and write a proposal to make some sort of meaningful change in your workplace. Well, if that's the case, you need to be familiar with this kind of process. Now, there are some recursive loops when it comes to the writing process, and I'm just going to briefly talk about this. Essentially, you can bounce back and forth between stages 1 and 2 as many times as you want without jeopardizing the final product or the essay. When you get to the thesis statement and the outline, you got to be careful, because once you commit to a particular vision and you have all your research already complete and you feel confident in it, that's when you need to say, okay, once I start writing the essay, there's no going back over this red line here. Once we pour the concrete foundation, that's it. We're following through with it. So you better like where you're building your house, right? Because you don't want to get halfway done building your house and be like, oh wait, we got to go back and reevaluate some things here. That's not what you want to do, because that's how you get yourself into a big mess and you give yourself a headache, and then you mistakenly and falsely tell yourself, oh, I'm just not a good writer. I'm not a good writer. No, the fact of the matter is you just didn't know the writing process. And maybe you just skipped a couple steps or you were kind of hasty with it. And that's all right, because, we're human. We make mistakes. But what I want you to do is just realize once you get here, be a little cautious, make sure that you're very confident in what you're going to write about, and then start writing the essay. And that's why we take so long building up to the essay portion in this class. Now, just like I said before, when you're doing the drafting phase and you're working with your proofreading and editing, just do a sentence or a paragraph at a time. Check your work as you go. Just like if you were building a house, you would want to make sure that things are going the way they're supposed to. Like you don't want to put up all the drywall and finish the drywall, and then all of a sudden the electrician's like, hey, I didn't get to this room yet. You know what I mean? Like, now you got to go backtrack and take apart your old paragraph, try to rebuild it, and then you're franicking as the deadline starts looming. So you don't want to do that to yourself. I'm just going to briefly talk about stage 1, the preliminary thinking phase. because we already did it in Unit 1. This was a part of the exercise on the discussion board of talking about your ideas for your essay. And now you could maybe like you don't feel 100% confident in that direction right now. That's fine. You can use any of these methods here to help you start piecing your ideas together. One thing that I would highly recommend as you begin to prepare for this annotated bibliography in Unit 3 is a curiosity exercise. I would recommend setting a timer for 10 or 15 minutes and just write down as many questions about your topic as possible. Don't worry about grammar, mechanics, style, or anything like that. Just get a big notebook and start writing and walk away from it for a day or maybe just a few hours and come back to it with fresh eyes and take note of any sort of themes that pop up when you are asking these questions. And if you see the same question that's asked like 4 or 5 different times, just in different ways, then it's like, okay, maybe I'm onto something here. Maybe this is something that I can pursue. And that will start bridging the gap between the stage 1 and stage 2 of the writing process. So stage 2 is what we're predominantly going to be talking about in this PowerPoint. And we're going to pretty much go through all of this in extreme detail. So open-ended questions are ideal for research. You want to avoid those yes/no questions because they're just going to lead you down, a dead end. You're not going to be able to really follow up on it. And those open-ended questions, they help you dig into that gray area that most controversial issues or topics, that's where most of the conversations are. They're in that gray area. And you should let your questions lead you to more questions. You want to go down the rabbit hole, and I'll teach you how to do that with a really cool tactic called fishing in the bibliographies. And I'll show you exactly how to do that later on. Developing a working thesis statement. We already kind of did that in Unit 1. This is something where it's like, we're going to talk how to build a very solid thesis statement, but essentially it's a hypothesis at this point. You could think of a working thesis statement as a hypothesis. It's, what you know, what you expect you're going to find in the literature. And then when you get to the researching part, it's what do you want to know and what do you hope to learn? And then what did you actually learn? So there is a little bit of a process here that we're going to talk about. Now, focusing on high quality sources, I'm going to show you guys how to use the academic database and how to use it the correct way. You want to research all perspectives, not just the ones you agree with, and I'll explain why. And never research to prove, always research to find out. That last one's super important. And if you happen to skip stages 1, 2, and 3, you will pretty much always fail on this particular point, because what'll happen is, and this happens all the time, when a student skips stages 1 through 3 and they just jump right into the paper, they research as they go, which means they're cherry picking evidence and they're not really thinking about the evidence that they're bringing up. They're just kind of filling all these voids just to fill up space on the paper and just to get through it and get it done to meet the word count. So it's very easy when I read those papers, it's like, okay, this student didn't really take time to make this paper because they didn't research all the perspectives. They just cherry picked evidence, and it'll show me right in the thesis statement, because I'll show you guys how to build a thesis statement that has a built-in rebuttal component where it demonstrates that, hey, I did my research. Now, the art of asking good questions. Remember, we want to have those open-ended questions, not those yes/no questions. And yeah, your high school teacher was wrong. There are such thing as bad questions. That is 100% true. But luckily, there are good questions too. And the best example that I come up with that I like to tell my students is, what is the meaning of life? Terrible question. Why? Well, it's not objective. You're not going to solve it in a 5-paragraph essay because no one has solved it in the last several thousands of years. And of course, it would be super hard to come up with some sort of irrefutable evidence that is actually contestable. Everything would be based on some sort of belief or personal taste or something along those lines. So really, you run into a lot of circles, circular reasoning with this question. You really can't come up with anything too significant, and that's pretty much it. At the end of the day, if you wrote a paper on this, it would be a whole lot of agreeing to disagree or in my belief, right? Now, if we reframe this problem statement, we can actually have a more meaningful question. And instead of saying, how can I, or instead of saying, what is the meaning of life, we could say, how can I live my life more meaningfully? So now we're getting a little closer to something that can be answered. Yeah, we can't answer it objectively. We can't say, just because I can live my life more meaningfully in X, Y, and Z ways, it doesn't mean it's going to be helpful for your neighbor down the street, for instance, or people living in another country. But it helps you start piece together some things that are in your life based on your knowledge and experience, how your perceptions of society and culture and where you fit in. And it can impact your decisions. And sometimes readers will resonate with you. Um, so this is inching closer to a good question. Now, if we're going to reframe this again, or we can refine it actually, we can refine it for an academic audience where we can make it more contestable. We can make it researched. We can actually include some literature on the topic. So the best example of reframing this question and refining it is, well, what can Western societies learn from Eastern Asian philosophies and religions about living a meaningful life? So we can actually research this. The scope is manageable. We can zoom in on some particular ideas, Confucius, Hagukari, Tao Te Ching. We've got different avenues. It's still debatable. There's still some conversations and debate among it. But the big thing is, it's contestable, right? It's not based on belief. It's not based on your subjective experiences or anything like that. It opens up the door for conversation, and we can actually get somewhere with it. Whereas the previous two questions more or less had dead ends. The first one had all the dead ends. The second one gave you a little bit of wiggle room, but something like this can really kind of be researched, right? And again, what we're trying to do here is not trying to find the ultimate answer. And you shouldn't proclaim that you have it either, because that's not the role of the academic. And that's not the role of any of us coming into this class. We have to approach our research with a humble mind. And what we need to do is sometimes find those stale problem statements and just tweak them in little ways where we can start asking the right questions that can lead us down new paths that nobody thought of before. Because if you just run around in the same circle with what is the meaning of life, what is the meaning of life, it's you're a fish in a fishbowl. You're not getting out, and you just keep going around in a circle. So what you need to do is change the environment of that question, and all of a sudden you can start looking at things from new and meaningful perspectives. So yeah, I mean, that's really the art of asking good questions. And I would challenge you to reframe your questions and your topics in a way where you can start opening up those doors rather than closing them all. Now, I mentioned earlier you don't want to research to prove. And what does this mean? Well, usually it means you skip stages 1, 2, and 3. You just jump right into the essay and you start cherry picking evidence. You attack the straw man. Maybe you fall victim to groupthink, which is just, everybody thinks the same thing. So now I'm going to argue it as well. Ultimately, what you want to do is do your diligence, think critically about your information that you're coming across. Have an open mind, but not so open that your brain falls out of your head. But also don't be so stubborn that you're not open to reading anything and you're just falling back on all your experience, because at the end of the day, what we have blind spots in our knowledge. So that's why we want to research to find out. And when we research to find out, we're going to discover new things and we need to document them. We want to seek out all the conflicting voices. We want to look at things from a bird's eye view, and start piecing it together. And what you want to ultimately do with your research is create a network of knowledge where you can compare and contrast and juxtapose your sources with one or another and look at the strengths, look at the weaknesses, see the opportunities where you can connect them, and also see those blind spots where it's like, no, there's something missing here. And there's a huge gap in the literature. So what are we going to do about it? Maybe this is a spot where I need to research more, or maybe there's no research on it at all, which in that case you can bring to the attention of your readers in your paper. Cross-referencing is something that you should absolutely do. You don't want to take one source's word for gospel. What you want to do is, if you see one claim supported, well, look up some other literature that could either validate it or potentially refute it. And if you find one that refutes it, don't just throw it away. That's something to talk about. Something to talk about in your paper. Now, surplus of seeing right here, essentially that's what you're doing when you're researching. Just like you have eyes that look forward in the front of your head and you can't see what's behind you, well, that's where the research comes in, and it provides you a mirror that you can hold up to yourself and check your blind spots. It's achieving a surplus of seeing. The fog of war, essentially, this is when you're sifting through the literature. It's kind of like if you're on a video game or something and there's the fog of war looming over the map. You want to explore those dark areas and figure out what is there. You want to understand what's in that fog and understand if there's potential there for building some sort of argument, or maybe there's some great resources there that you can use. What you don't want to do is be afraid of that fog and just go around it. Obviously, leave out emotions, politics, and religion. And yeah, be open-minded, be critical, but mostly be honest. Integrity of a researcher is of the utmost importance. Now, this is going to go over the best way to use an academic database. And there's going to be a couple slides here where I actually show you exactly how to do this. And I'll show you kind of what the end goal is. So you want to create a research word or phrase. Doesn't need to be long, doesn't need to be complex. It just needs to capture the fundamental essence of what you're trying to learn. And then you can use Boolean codes or you could use quotation marks, and I'll explain what those are on the next slide, to further specify what you're looking for. And then filtering. Filtering is the most important thing when it comes to using an academic database, because you're going to have a bunch of results, and the ones at the top aren't always necessarily the most relevant or helpful. So when you go to the CSU online library, it's going to look something like this. And for this particular research phase or phrase, we're going to use human cloning and ethics. And you'll notice that I put quotation marks around human cloning. I used all caps for the word and then nothing for ethics. So what does this mean? How does this change the research here? Essentially, if I put these quotation marks around a certain phrase, that means those words have to come up in the order they're typed in the search results. So if there's a title out there, it would have to be human cloning next to each other. It can't be the other way around. So if I said cloning humans, it would have totally different search results than this. So you only want to use those quotations if you want that phrase to come up verbatim in your results. The reason why I used all caps and here, which that tells the database that it needs to have this exact phrase and the word ethics. It can't have one or the other. If you used or, then it could be one or the other. But because we gave it the command and, it has to produce results that have both of them. And if it does not have both of them, it will exclude it completely. And then we check the box peer reviewed, making sure it's scholarly, and then we search. So what comes up, right? What do we do from here? How often have you gone into the database and be like, all right, what am I looking at here? What is this? And maybe you're like, okay, let me sort it by relevance here, and let me click on that first one and see if it has anything to do with what I'm doing. And 9 times out of 10, it's like a total miss, a total dud. You're like, well, this database sucks. There's nothing in here. Let me just use Google. And what I want you to prevent is just using Google for everything. You can, as a caveat to that, you can use google.com/scholar, which is the academic database for Google. You're going to come up with a lot of academic articles in there. But I don't want you to just throw away the CSU library just because you had a bad experience or two. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to teach exactly how to filter this down. So if you have a result that's almost 8,000 articles, your goal is to reduce those results because obviously you're not going to sift through 7,800 plus articles. So let's start with the obvious, right? Let's say we only want academic articles or academic journals, and we want the English language, all right? That's not going to cut down a whole lot, but it's going to start filtering down, the relevant articles. Now, the big key is filtering down the subject, and this is what's going to make or break how successful you are with this strategy. So when you filter down by the subject, there's going to be all these different options in there, and the number next to them indicates how many articles are directly related to that or focus on that particular subtopic. Now, for this example, I'm just going to say stem cells. So this theoretically should narrow down our 7,500 or 7,800 or whatever we have down to 451 because they talk directly about stem cells, and that's what I want to focus on in my paper. Now, we can do this again. So what happens is when you filter down the subject, it will create subsubjects or subtopics that are related to the overarching subject. So now you can filter down your results even more. So out of those 450 articles from the previous slide on the stem cell, well, let's say we want to study just human embryos and that's it. Now we're down to 44 articles. And what we can do from there, we can actually do this again if you need to. So you can filter it down by the subject, the subtopic, and then the subtopic. And what you're going to do by doing this is you're going to get the most relevant articles out of those original 8,000. So that saves you a lot of work because this only takes a few moments to do. And what you'll do is you'll be like, okay, here we go. I'm happy with this result. We got 26 results here, and all it took was 6 filters. So that would be the English, sorting it by academic journals, peer review, and then a couple knockdowns with the subject, right? So after all this filtering, now we come across articles that are going to be the most relevant to what we're looking for. And 26 is a whole lot manageable, or a whole lot more manageable than 400 or 1,000 or anything like that. So we've got something to work with. So what do we do now? Well, we can refilter the search results if needed. We can always go back. We can always build a new phrase. If you're not finding anything that is standing out to you where you're like, oh, I can't use any of this, now what? Well, there's nothing that says you can't go back, rearrange your research phrase, play with the Boolean codes, see if you can find something else, use a different keyword, um, whatever to get, whatever to get you kind of back to square one and try again. And sometimes it might take a few tries, but eventually what you'll do is you'll find something where it's like, okay, I can work with this, I can use this. Now, out of those 26 results, uh, I wouldn't expect you to read all 26 of them to figure out what the heck you're going to use in your paper, because that's crazy. Some of those papers are 10, 20 pages long, sometimes more. So to try to read all of that is going to be a huge, colossal waste of time. So what I want you to do is scan those abstracts. And you can see them right here. Here's part of the abstract, but after you click on it, it'll show the complete abstract. And then you can start looking at those keywords and phrases. If you don't like it, you just go back to your 26 result, go to the next one, check that abstract, open it up, look for those keywords and phrases, and just move on. And fishing for sources in the bibliographies is a very helpful tool, and it's going to help you build a network of knowledge, like I mentioned earlier, one of those goals for the researching stage. So let's say we found a resource that works for us, and let's say it's that very first one that came up in that search. So we have moral qualms, future persons, embryo research. Here's an example of the abstract. So all those academic journals, they're going to have some sort of abstract. They're all going to have keywords that come up as well. And let's say just based on this abstract and these keywords, it's like, okay, I think I can work with this. I think I can use some of this in my paper. Cool. So let's say we read it and we're definitely using it in our paper. Now what we're going to want to do is start scanning the bibliography. And every source in the academic database that comes from a journal article or a journal that has some sort of reputation to it, it's going to have some sort of footnotes or citations, reference entries. Don't get caught up on the formatting here, because all those journal articles, they're all going to have different formatting. Some of them are going to be in Chicago style, some of them MLA, some APA, some of them are going to be like super old versions of those as well, because they don't update them over time. They just publish them in whatever version they were in. So what do we do here when we're fishing in this bibliography? We're looking for those keywords again. We're looking to see, okay, what can I use? What can I use? Maybe I could use this article. Maybe I could use that article. And when you pinpoint one or more sources that catch your eye, like let's say this one, controversies over stem cell research. That sounds like something I could use for a argumentative paper about stem cells, right? Stem cell usage in human cloning, for instance. So it's like, okay, let me follow up on this and see if I can find it. So I copy and paste this right here, the author and the name of the article. Copy and paste it into the search bar, and voila, there it is. So now you can look up the sources that one particular source used. Now you could go and read it for yourself and potentially use that in your argument or in your paper somewhere. And this is how you build, again, a network of knowledge where you have authors citing each other or potentially disagreeing and refuting with each other. And it helps you start building more sources as well in your paper, because again, all you need is that one source to kind of kickstart everything. And then once you get there, it's like, okay, let me immerse myself in this conversation. Let me understand what's going on here. And then you start reading all the things that they were citing, and you read into this bibliography next. And maybe there's a source in there where it's like, okay, I could take this and I could run with it. And all of a sudden, researching and finding sources isn't a pain or a struggle anymore. All of a sudden, you'll be like, oh, I've got 5 or 6 different sources here. I might have to trim things down a little bit. So you actually kind of run into the opposite problem. Now, when you are evaluating and record keeping all of these sources, because it can get a little crazy, there's a couple different methods that you can use to help you. And again, to put this in the context of this course, in Unit 3, you're writing an annotated bibliography. So, what are you doing in an annotated bibliography? I'm going to talk about that in a few slides. But essentially, what you're doing is you're summarizing what your source is about. You're determining if it's credible, relevant, accurate, purposeful. It should be from a reputable journal article. So, you're making sure it's a solid, reliable source. And then when you're documenting it in your annotated bibliography, it's a good idea to say, this is the main topic. This is the type of publication it was from. The author was some sort of expert in their field. The audience was for other scholars or other experts, or if it's something more related to the world of safety, or let's say firefighters, the audience was a panel of fire chiefs, or the audience was a bunch of people from OSHA, right? Whatever. And then what's the purpose? Why did the author actually write this article? What was the intention? Is it informational? Is it argumentative? And you can start documenting everything that way. And if that seems a little crazy, you could always just rely on the 5 W's: your who, what, when, where, why, and how. That's a very simple, easy thing to remember. And if you do get kind of caught up in the assignment, just fall back on the who, what, when, where, why, and how. Because at the end of the day, that's what it's all about, is just helping you build an annotated bibliography in the right way. So here's an example of an annotated bibliography entry, and this one's a little bit more complex. I actually wrote this one for my thesis, for my master's thesis, and you'll notice that in the beginning it's just talking about what this book is about, uh, talking about what the book's about, what's the source about. And then in the second part, I talk about why it could be important in my thesis. And I try to relate it to other sources that I've already researched. And, it's not really an academic paper. It's not an essay per se. It's really just notes for me as the writer to fall back on and be like, uh, how is this book or how is this source helpful? But you know what? Let's take a step back here. I want you to keep it simple, right? If you look at at all those words, you're going to get flustered. You're going to look at it and be like, what the heck? This is too much. Just keep it simple. Use strap, use the W's to summarize your source. That's your first part of making an annotated bibliography. Afterwards, you talk about how it can help you write your paper. So if we go back, look, we talk about the source, and then we talk about how it's going to help you write the paper. 2 sections, very simple. And at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. If you can start connecting your sources with each other, that's great. But again, this is 1302. We're not writing a master's thesis at this point. What we're trying to do is just keep it simple. If you do start connecting them, that's great. If they are standalone sources, that's totally fine too. But at the end of the day, it's a wise idea to just summarize the source and just start piecing together those different pieces of the puzzle. Now, let's assume we've got 4 or 5 different sources, and they're all reliable. They're all things that we're planning on integrating into our paper. Now, what we need to do is start building an argument. And maybe you want to start with like a little rough draft of this as you're researching. That's totally fine. But I like to teach the Tolman model. And the Tolman model has a couple different parts to it. But the big thing I want you to kind of focus on this slide is this relationship between the backing and the rebuttal. So if we're going to break this down into simplest terms, the ground is essentially what you're claiming in. Your warrant is going to be, because. So I have this belief because, and then you have some sort of evidence or statistics or some sort of publication that supports your claim. You want to use a qualifier, presumably, or I mean, there's a bunch of different words you could use here, but what you want to avoid is a universal qualifier like always or none. You would have to be very confident to use those kind of qualifiers, but generally you should have some sort of presumably, because again, we are writing controversial topics here. We're bringing up conflicting evidence. So there is no clear cut answer most of the time. There's a lot of gray area. So it's important to include those kind of qualifiers in there to give the rebuttal a fair voice, and to maintain our credibility as a writer, being objective and as unbiased as possible. And the rebuttal is essentially just the counterpoint. So here's my evidence, here's the counterpoint. In this particular instance, Steve has a bad personality. He can't work with others. So should we hire Steve? Well, he's got all this good stuff going for him, but what about this? So as the writer, you would have to rebuttal the rebuttal, come up with a counterpoint, uh, use a warrant and a new backing, and potentially they won't have a new rebuttal for that one. So a lot of academic writing is a volleying between rebuttals and new evidence, rebuttals and new evidence. And you'll see that a lot as you dive into research as well. And again, that's why we're not cherry picking evidence here. We're not attacking the straw man, making all these logical fallacies. And we're researching to find out, not prove. And again, if you skip stages 1 through 3 and you jump straight to the writing phase or the drafting phase and stage 4, you're going to have a heck of a hard time trying to include this element on building a fair argument into your paper. Now, if we're going to expand an argument, it's a good idea to have a diverse kind of arsenal of tools and resources. So yeah, expert opinions. Maybe we can look at laws or publications over here. Those would be like your NFPA standards or your OSHA standards. You can look at statistics. You can have examples from the real world, for example, or you could look to newspapers and look for case studies. All of these different things should contribute somehow to your overarching goal. This says conclusion, but you could also think of this as your thesis statement. You could think of this as your reason X, your reason Y, your reason Z. And then you just build off of them and you start building your arguments and your research that way. But the important thing is to also add in those rebuttals, because that's very important to include when you're actually sitting down and writing your paper. And it's very important when you sit down and you start outlining your paper. Kind of have those rebuttals on the sideline and you anticipate it. That way you're not taken by surprise. You already know it's coming. Just like, let's say you were building the house again in stages 1 through 5. We're building the house. The contractor knows the inspector is coming and he's going to inspect the work. That's an anticipation. That's an anticipation of a rebuttal. The inspector is coming. So let's make sure that everything is squared away the way it needs to be, because we don't want to have to deal with some sort of rebuttal. And if they do find something, well, we're experienced. We've already looked ahead and we know what we're going to do, right? So you can apply the same sort of anticipation to your ideas when you're drafting an outline and coming up with some sort of argument. Now, all of this stuff being said, we also have thesis statements and outlines. And this is looking specifically at Unit 4. The Unit 4 assignment, the key is writing an introduction, having a more or less firm thesis statement, and then we're going to outline the rest of the paper. So really what we're looking at over the next month, like I mentioned before, is A whole lot of planning, a whole lot of research. That's why we're focusing on this so much right now. Now, if you take away anything from this PowerPoint, one of the biggest things is this thesis statement formula. And I would highly recommend taking a picture of this slide. If you were in my class last term, you know how much I harped on this, and I mentioned it in both of the live lectures in unit or in English 1301. And again, it pops up here in 1302. Why? Because it's so important. It's so important. So the thesis statement formula worth memorizing is, even though the opposing point of view, my stance is nevertheless important because X, Y, and Z. So this is the built-in rebuttal component. Now, I mentioned earlier, I could tell if a student skipped stages 1 through 3 based on their introduction and their thesis statement. If they skip stages 1 through 3, they will not have a built-in rebuttal in their thesis statement because they didn't research it. So that's a huge red flag for me. Now, when I do see the opposing point of view acknowledged in the introduction or in the thesis statement, it's like, see, this student did their research. They researched all the perspectives. They know those perspectives just as well as they know theirs. And they weren't going into this with the mindset of just, here's my stance and let me just, totally annihilate the opposition and just talk about all the reasons why I'm right. And here's all the reasons why I'm right. Let me just cherry pick all this evidence. Yeah, that's not what we're looking for. That's not what we're about. And unfortunately, most of the time, when students skip all that pre-planning and they jump straight to the paper, they won't even include the X, Y, and Z yet because they haven't even researched it yet. They just go in with my stance, and that's it. So that's a super weak thesis statement. And my goal is to help you write a solid one, something that you can take with you after this class and apply to higher level courses. So our real world example. So even though Lang 2013 argues childhood obesity is a societal fault, we'll say that's the opposing point of view. And because we cited it here with a nice little narrative citation, it demonstrates to the readers right away that, hey, this person knows what they're talking about because they're citing people that they don't even agree with, which is good. That means you did your homework and you did your literature and you went through the processes the right way. She nevertheless undermines the important role parents assume to either enable or combat childhood obesity on a micro scale. So the conflict here, the controversy is, it's the media's fault, it's the school's fault. And then our stance in this particular instance is, no, it's the parents' fault. The parents need to take more accountability. Why? Because the impact on their child's daily habits, we'll call that reason X. And hopefully, what you'll do before you make this thesis statement is actually have an article or a source in your arsenal or in your annotated bibliography that supports that. The cultivation of self-discipline, that could be our reason why, and accessibility to healthy and unhealthy food options, reason Z. So ideally, you should have a source on the sidelines for X, Y, and Z before you even make this thesis statement. And now, if we look down here at the bottom, you'll notice that with this particular thesis statement formula, your essay will almost write itself because you've already outlined your paper. Now, this is a very simple thesis. This is a very simple paper here. This is just a 5-paragraph essay. We could always expand these into, reason X, and then you could do like a sub X paragraph and a sub X paragraph. You could do the same thing with Y. So instead of these being their own body paragraphs, you could think of it as chapter X and chapter Y and chapter Z, or that where they have their own sections. of multiple paragraphs and multiple outside sources supporting each one. And that's going to be kind of where we go in the direction with our paper in Unit 7. It's going to be a little bit longer than a 5-paragraph essay, but the same principle applies. So again, what we have here is a rock solid thesis statement formula that is very flexible. We can adapt it to all different types of all different types of argumentative topics. And then with that information, we can easily create a skeleton for our paper, an outline that we can use that'll help us piece together our final essay. So let's see. There we go. So concluding remarks here. You are here. This is where you are, right? We are in week 2. So we have a long ways ahead of us. And what I would want you to kind of take away here is just be mindful of where we're at. So we're still here, preliminary thinking phase, and we're beginning the transition into the researching phase. So what are we going to do? We're going to start creating those open-ended researching questions, start asking those good questions, maybe reframing those problem statements into ways where maybe we can open up some new doors. And then you start following up on it. And then in Unit 3, so we got pretty much 2 weeks until the Unit 3 assignment is due. So that's a fairly long time to start digging into the academic database, start utilizing that filtering tactic that we talked about, start fishing in those bibliographies, start making a network of knowledge. That's quite a bit of time. And then by the time we get to week 4, you should have a pretty solid thesis and an outline made. And again, we're not actually writing the final essay yet. Everything is just planning. Everything is planning. We don't pour the concrete foundation for our paper until we get up here. So we do have quite a bit of time. Now, that concludes the presentation. We did pretty good on time here. So do you guys have any sort of questions? I hear the chat going, so let me see what we got here. So Eli, yes, I will post this. In fact, after you guys submit the Unit 3 assignment and you say that you attended, I will give you the PowerPoint in the feedback for it, okay? So yes, Gene, yep, I will make sure that you get it. Again, it's going to be in the feedback. So whenever you say I attend, I'll send it to you in that, and you should have it. I'm not going to post it in an announcement though, because I don't want the students that did not attend to just look at the PowerPoint. I want them to actually watch the video. But yes, in the feedback, get it. You're very welcome, guys. So if you guys don't have any questions, that's totally fine. You guys are free to go. If you do end up having some questions about anything we talked about, you can shoot me a message. You can send me an email. You guys also have my phone number. Just don't text me at odd hours of the night because I'm not going to answer. You can always send me a text message and then I'll get back to you when I can. But yeah, you guys have a great night as well. You guys have a great evening. And that's all I've got for you guys. So thank you. I appreciate you.